Tell the rambler, the gambler,
Johnny Cash, God's gonna cut you down. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Canada, a civil liberties group says it's looking into filing a lawsuit against the Toronto police following mass arrests at the G20 summit last week. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association says it's been overwhelmed with phone calls and complaints. It's now estimated 900 people, perhaps 1,000, including many journalists, were arrested over the weekend. Toronto Police Chief Bill Blair says the department's launched an internal review, but there are growing demands for a public inquiry. On Thursday, protest rallies were held in Toronto, Montreal, and Winnipeg against the brutal police crackdown. Civil liberties advocates are also up in arms after it emerged that the Toronto police were secretly given new and unprecedented powers of arrest in the lead-up to the G20. On June 2nd, Ontario secretly changed its Public Works Protection Act to allow police officers special powers to arrest anyone near the site of the summit if they fail to identify themselves. The new regulation only came to light after it was used for the first time on a 31-year-old man who was arrested near the security fence after he refused to identify himself to the police. Dave Acey was held for hours without knowing why before being released. His story was front-page news of the Toronto Star. I caught up with Dave Acey at the march on the streets of Toronto this weekend and asked him to talk about what happened.
My name's Dave Acey. The other day, Thursday, following the Indigenous Sovereignty and Solidarity March, a friend of mine and myself were walking down by the fence area, just checking out what a $1.2 billion fence looked like. And we had a couple marks that marked us as activists. We had a bag saying Homeland Security and another one saying a sticker with No Olympics on Stolen Native Land. The police grabbed us, began to ask for identification, and we were operating within the Know Your Rights frame, which had said you don't need to provide identification to the police unless you're under arrest. I continued to just say that I was not comfortable with providing my identification to the police. They said if I didn't, I would be placed under arrest, and I was subsequently placed under arrest and held for 5 hours at the movie studio jail complex.
Did you ask why?
I had asked, and they had said there was a new bylaw in effect, but they had done an illegal search on us the night before. We were detained the night before. They illegally searched our bags, even though we had said we don't consent to our bags being searched and we know this is illegal. So I hadn't heard of this bylaw at all and was just operating under what I knew from what the legal community had provided to protesters before.
What are your plans now?
We'll be launching a lawsuit on Monday against the police for violating constitutionally held rights.
A lot of people are surprised by this law. Is it a temporary law?
I have no idea. I'm hoping it's a temporary law, but no one knows anything about the law at this point. Even the legal community, when I spoke with them, they had no idea what the implications were. They didn't even know how it actually was going to operate during the summit.
Dave Acey, the first person arrested under the new law in Toronto that allowed police to detain anyone near the site of the G20 summit if they failed to identify themselves or refused to allow their bags to be searched. The regulation was temporary for the G20. It kicked in on June 21st and expired on June 28th, the day after the summit ended. Well, also in Toronto, I spoke with Sid Lacombe. He was in front of the U.S. consulate in Toronto. He's the national coordinator of the Canadian Peace Alliance. I spoke to him just before he was planning to march toward the major demonstrations that were happening on Saturday. He described how his house was broken into and ransacked the night before.
My name's Sid Lacombe. I'm the national coordinator of the Canadian Peace Alliance, and what happened was last night I just got home after we were out at the shout-out for global justice with everyone else, and I got back to my house and the entire place had been ransacked, drawers pulled, things removed. there were certain things stolen, but a peculiar collection of things that were stolen. The tools were stolen, but the money on the dresser was not touched. All of the files were clearly routed through back and forth, and whoever this was sophisticated enough to get through 2 sets of combination deadbolts without leaving a scratch, which is not the common thing you see in my neighborhood. It's usually someone who smashes through a window. We don't know what this is precisely, but I mean, coming on the day before the G20 mobilization as one of the organizers of the rally here today, we assume that there's some sort of, actually what should I say on that? I haven't actually gone through that particular part of it yet. So yeah, I mean, there has been other intimidation of other activists. People were rounded up last night. There were 6 organizers apparently were picked up last night. So I'm just wondering if it was the fact that I wasn't home at that moment that means that I didn't end up getting picked up under those circumstances. But it's clearly quite suspicious that this would have happened at this moment, and that, again, they would not have stolen the electronics and the money and all of those sorts of bits and pieces. But ultimately, it is about, the police presence that we've seen all throughout the week in the lead up to the G20 here, where we've seen really, really over-the-top police presence and attacks on people and searches, constant sort of violations of civil liberties.
Are you saying you had 2 deadbolts on your door? 2 deadbolts on your door?
It's on outside door and inside door, and both of them, again, not a scratch on anything. Sid Lacombe is coordinator of the Canadian Peace Alliance. We were speaking about 1 o'clock on Saturday of the major protest. It was raining outside. He had joined other peace activists, as well as a mother of a Canadian soldier who was serving in Afghanistan. She was speaking out against the war in front of the U.S. consulate in Toronto. They were joining the mass march that was taking place that day. This, again, the G8, G20 summit was happening, and just hours before, his home had been broken into.